Notice when you came into this session that your cameras and microphones were turned off. This session is going to be a little bit differently than our previous two sessions. Each of you has the ability to turn your cameras and microphones on and off, but for the accessibility of our ASL viewers, we're asking that you keep your videos and mics off during our presentation sections. Now, while we're waiting for the next few minutes, I just wanted to pose a check-in question. And that question is, I'd like to know what has been inspiring you this week. So please feel free to drop in the chat a response to that question. What has been inspiring you this week? Once again, I just wanted to let you all know that we'll be starting at 1:05. This way we can give a little bit of time for everybody to get logged in. And this is our funding our communities, San Francisco's $11 billion budget as a strategy for abolition series, or session, excuse me, part of our third Abolition in Action series. We welcome you all today, and we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Getting out to nature and learning from the creativity and resilience of forests, definitely inspiring. See, another person had mentioned that they're inspired by the national uprising that is saying no to police and government repression. Definitely inspiring for me as well. Been inspired by the Black Lives Matters movement? Absolutely. All right, we'll be starting again in about a minute. Just letting everybody get in. Okay, it's now 1:05, so let's go ahead and get started. First off, I'd like to ask everybody how they're doing, and I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Bobby, and I'm with the No New San Francisco Jail Coalition. I'm also joined in this first part of the presentation with Wes, who's another member of our coalition, as well as Kevin, the political director at Coleman Advocates. Now, today, we have a pretty dynamic and empowering event for you. You'll get some new information, be able to collaborate with others, and even practice some new skills. So we really hope that you'll be able to stay with us for the entire session. Now, although many have been on Zoom meetings before, I wanted to go over a few of our Zoom 101 instructions. Also, I wanted to let you know that we'll be posting accessibility instructions in the chat box regularly for those who need to join later. Now, before we start, since this is an open forum, we wanted to make sure that everyone keeps their microphones muted and their cameras off during the presentation sections. As I mentioned earlier, doing this will help ensure that our ASL interpreters remain visible to everyone. Now, although we ask this during the presentation sections, we strongly encourage you to turn on your cameras and mics when you go to the breakout rooms. For me, personally, being able to see who I'm talking to always helps to build camaraderie and rapport. We'll also be addressing questions throughout the meeting in the chat, so go ahead and drop them in the chat box. And just to let you know, we've disabled the private participant-to-participant chat feature, but you can still post messages to everyone or directly to the host. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, in order to bring up the chat box that I keep mentioning, you may have to click on the bottom of your screen in the middle where it says chat to turn on this function. The chat box will then pop up on the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll be able to type your comments and your questions in there. Now, if you have any issues with us recording this event, please let us know in the chat or via email. Also, you may have noticed that closed caption appears at the bottom of the screen. The font size is adjustable, so if you need it to be larger, please let us know in the chat. Finally, we've also included instructions for Spanish audio in the chat box. Pues, si hablas español, mira en la chat box por instrucciones. All right, now moving on to some of our group agreements that we wanted to start. First is that this is a liberated zone. And what this means is that we want you to be able to speak truth, but to also listen with respect. Literacy moments. Feel free to ask questions for clarity. There's no right or wrong questions. We also want you to be able to share the time. This is often known as taking space to share your thoughts, but also making space for others to share theirs. And we want you to both expect and accept a lack of closure. Although we'll be covering a lot today, we won't be able to solve everything in one day. So please feel free to suggest any other community agreements that you'd like to see in the chat box. Now moving on to the agenda, I'm going to give you a little history about no new SF jails, and then my colleagues will be talking about the budget and how it can be a strategy for abolition. After a short break, we'll then use our expertise as San Franciscans to define ways that we think the budget should be used. And finally, in order to bring these demands to life, in our last section, we'll be practicing writing and speaking comments for public hearings. So you may be thinking, what is abolition in action and why the budget? Well, to give you a little history about our coalition, it is made up of several organizations that have been fighting jailing and criminalization in San Francisco since 2013. And during this time, we've had some pretty good wins. From our start, we encouraged the city to not build a new jail, and we were able to get the supervisors to unanimously support this measure. In 2018, we had formally started the Shut Down 850 campaign in order to close down the disgusting, inhumane, and earthquake unsafe jail at County Jail Number 4. And this past May, with our continued efforts, we were able to get San Francisco to pass a law which requires the city to permanently close the building at 850 Bryant, which is where County Jail 4 is located. Now, as we're moving into the next phase of our campaign and preparing for 850's closure, we've been organizing a monthly series of events on different topics related to abolition. This is our Abolition in Action series, and these events are designed to generate conversations on abolition and help us learn and practice related skills so that we can realize a world that doesn't rely on punishment systems to deal with harm or conflict. So how does this all relate to the budget? Well, what the city funds in the budget is a direct statement of what they are focusing on and what they think will create the future that we want to see. This is just one reason why the budget advocacy is so important. We want to make sure that they are focusing on the changes that we actually want to see. Now, although I state that, it doesn't mean that the budget is the only way to be able to dismantle and build systems outside of that statement. We can all share a responsibility for investing our time and money in community solutions, and we can actively work to limit the powers of punishment systems which are funded by both the city and other sources. Now, I think the slides are a little bit off, but as I mentioned with this word abolition, or abolitionists a few times, I wanted to give you a little more context as to what that actually means. As noted in the slide, No New SF Jails is an abolitionist coalition, and abolition is both a political vision as well as an organizing strategy. I'm actually also on slide 6. This means that we are a coalition that organizes to dismantle San Francisco's jailing system by changing the conditions and power dynamics of San Francisco. We seek to build up, generate, and amplify community solutions to harm and conflict that doesn't rely on punishment, caging, imprisonment, policing, surveillance, or criminalization. And we do our work through abolitionist strategies that target different parts of San Francisco's jailing system. Then we work to chip away at those systems over time. Now, as I had mentioned before, we have started by chipping away at jailing by defeating a multi-million-dollar new jail proposal. And now we're continuing to ensure the permanent closing of County Jail 4 at 850 Bryant. As abolitionists, we see that the fight against jailing is the same struggle against policing and surveillance, whether that's defunding SFPD, ending quality of life policing, decreasing the use of electronic monitoring, ending gang injunctions, stopping sweeps and raids of houseless encampments, or ending anti-loitering ordinances like sit and lie. All of these fights are interrelated, and they all require building the solutions which can replace those oppressive systems. Take the model used by Communities United Against Violence, for example. CUAV is a community-based organization which has built up systems of support and infrastructure to be able to help people respond to harm and conflict without involving the police. Now, in our next slide, you can see how our abolitionist vision and strategy play out in our 10-point platform, which is on slide 7. The first 5 points focus on how we fight criminalization by dismantling the jailing and police systems. And the last 5 points speak directly to the community building work that we aim to see. And it is these things that we want to see cities' resources to go to. Right, look like we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're back on. So, on to slide 8. Finally, before passing it off to Kevin, I wanted to leave you all with our anti-policing statement. You'll notice in the graphic how it states that African Americans make up only 7% of the city's population. And that number is rapidly decreasing due to things such as gentrification. Yet, they make up over 56% of the people locked up in the jail. Those statistics are just one example demonstrating the unjust targeting of Blacks by our current policing system. I mentioned this to you to let you know that on our website, you can find tons of organizing resources. On our campaign resources page, under the Shutdown 850 tab, you'll see flyers and platforms, including our Stop Criminalizing Our Community anti-policing statement, which includes more information on how policing, jailing, and probation are all interlinked and need to be targeted and dismantled together. Also, if you have any other questions on abolition or on our coalition, please feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. With time permitted, we'll try to address these questions during this webinar, but if we run out of time, we'll answer them in our follow-up email that goes out after the event. Now, I'd like to pass it off to Kevin so he can talk about Coleman Advocates' recent victory and discuss how police and prisons are funded.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone on today. My name is Kevin Bogus. I'm the policy director at Coleman Advocates for Children and Youth. Coleman Advocates for Children and Youth is a parent and youth organizing organization in San Francisco. We do base building with high school students and parents, primarily in elementary school in the southeast part of San Francisco. Our work primarily is centered around education equity and closing the opportunity and achievement gap that Black and Latinx students face in San Francisco public schools, as well as trying to end the school to prison pipeline and stop the criminalization of young people. We've been around since 1975. Our most recent victory, working with board member Commissioner Allison Collins, to pass a resolution to essentially terminate the relationship between the SFPD and the SF school district by ending the MOU and the shared salary position that was shared between the district and the police department. In a lot of ways, this victory is a victory of this moment and kind of the nationwide uprising to police misconduct and the overuse of police in communities, in schools, in areas that aren't really for policing, but are really for supporting people and helping people rather than policing, which has a violent and dominating nature built into it. Um, so with this resolution passing, we're at a state now in the school district of what does it look like to have an alternative that's not the police? So we're in the process of trying to figure out how to build real community response to situations at schools to make sure that police officers aren't needed and that everyone feels safe and connected to their community and knows what to do to support each other in times of crisis. And so I think for us, we're really excited and we view the public school system here in San Francisco as really a testing ground and kind of a pilot for what the city would look like as we move away from policing and develop alternatives that are based in the community that people can trust and have confidence in. So that's a little bit about Coleman Advocates and the work that we do. I'm going to talk a little bit about prisons, police and how they're funded, and really kind of the dollars that city governments, both in the state and federal governments, commit to law enforcement and criminalization. So as you can kind of see here on this slide, 23% of San Francisco's general fund in 2018, 2019 went towards criminalization. And so just to be clear, that's not saying that much went towards the police, but that much went towards criminalization. So those things include a lot of different things like the sheriff's department, juvenile probation, adult probation, the district attorney's office, superior court, the police accountability group. But just think about how much money that is potentially out of the billions, the $12 billion that are in the police budget that could potentially be redirected to the community in ways that would support folks and really help make our communities better in a way that the reactionary nature of policing doesn't. And really deal with some of the structural inequities that come with policing and incarceration, which is the disproportionality that Black and Latinx folks face. I think with that, maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so the budget as a strategy towards abolition. In this moment in San Francisco, in the midst of the city budget kind of being laid out, a lot of groups are basically viewing this as a moment to ask the board and the mayor to show more accountability and really to show their commitment to moving away from policing and to really move towards more community-based alternatives. And so a big part of the conversation now is really centered around what's going to happen with the police budget and what does it mean to actually divest from the police and reinvest in community in the midst of a chorus of people with kind of different messages. It's important to understand that the police department and law enforcement isn't entirely funded through the city budget. But there's also federal and state funding that is incorporated into that as well. And there's also lots of rich individuals and businesses that make financial donations and contributions to help sustain the police. And the Police Officers Association, which does a lot of lobbying to not only, I'd say, protect police when they commit crimes, but also to make it harder for the community to hold police accountable. And so I think what we realize at Coleman Advocates is that it's really important to be in community and take advantage of the fact that we're in a moment where everyone, for the most part, has realized that we need to change our relationship with policing And how do we build a bridge towards abolition? How do we find ways to defund from things that harm communities to things that build them up, and divest from law enforcement in the systems that criminalize disproportionately Black and brown communities, to things that really support those communities' excellence and their success, and finding more ways for the community to get involved, and to give direction and leadership to elected officials through participating in direct actions, calling legislators, attending rallies, going to public meetings, participating in events like this and inviting other folks too. We need to expand these conversations and get people more involved so that we can get the results we want to see, versus waiting for someone else to do it. We kind of have to take it into our own hands and essentially make the road through walking as we venture down this new path. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Wes now, who's going to give us examples of a budget strategy from Portland and the Care Not Cops Coalition.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to start this section with an example of successful budget advocacy. Across the country, we're seeing calls for defunding the police. These are not new. Although San Francisco has its own specific political context, we can learn from others. The Portland Coalition, Care Not Cops, successfully urged the city to reject an increase to the proposed police budget. While there is still a lot of work to be done, we want to uplift the progress and conversation they've built for their action. So how did they accomplish this? Care Not Cops mobilized people to rally and testify at public forums, and they led a phone campaign aimed at council members. We have a sample of one of their 2-minute testimonies to share with you now, which is a great example of public comment. So if we could please play the video.
I'm here today as a queer, chronically sick Chicana Indigenous woman and a mental health service user. And I'm speaking today on the issue of increasing the police budget and as part of Care Not Cops mental health care, not policing. I understand we live in a time that questions the role and impact of police in our communities. I also know it's easy to disregard this anti-police fervor as a flashpoint or as irrational. Yet I challenge those unwilling to hear these critiques as being complacent in white supremacy. The system is not broken and just needs to be fixed. The system works as designed to cage, control, separate families. The system of policing is inherently anti-Black and anti-people. It is time Portland takes a stand and shows our community that we believe in real community self-determination and will not continue to dump our funds into increased policing of our most vulnerable communities. I want to note too that my brother is a police officer. I share this to contextualize that I can both love my brother and absolutely believe that he's an agent of white supremacy and advocate for the abolition of the police and the prison industrial complex. And instead advocate for the investment in life-affirming resources. Policing can never be a life-affirming resource. There is no amount of gadgets, training, or reforms that will make police life-affirming. If you want to ensure that every program in this room stays funded, you already have a $217 million police budget, not even including this 12.7 proposed budget increase to draw from. $217 million already that you could be funding everyone in this room. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks all. This is Christine. Just wanted to jump in real quick and ask our presenters to slow down a little bit, which will help our interpreters make sure what we're presenting is accessible to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine. Before we practice preparing our own public comments, let's first review the budget process and the associated timeline. We're going to get into the city budget cycle now. Generally speaking, beginning in September and concluding in July, the annual budget cycle in San Francisco can be divided into 3 major stages. First is budget preparation. This includes the period of budget development and its submission to the Board of Supervisors. The second is the approval. Here, the budget undergoes the review process, is subsequently enacted by the Board of Supervisors, and is signed by the mayor. Now, the review process is where the public has the opportunity to directly advocate during hearings through public comment. The third is implementation. Once the budget is approved and signed, city departments execute the various budget adjustments. So what is this timeline, and what are the current adjustments due to COVID-19? This timeline illustrates more comprehensively San Francisco's budget process on a normal year. You can see, included in purple, examples of how the budget process has been extended this year. Typically, things begin in September with preliminary revenue projections. Then, in December, the mayor's office and the controller's office issue budget instructions which contain detailed guidance on the preparation of all the various departmental budget requests. Departments then prepare their budget requests and submit them by mid-February. The controller consolidates, verifies, and refines the proposed budgets, and these are in turn turned over to the mayor's office. From March through June, the mayor's office analyzes each budget proposal. Concurrently, the city conducts budget outreach to obtain feedback from the community on budget priorities and to ensure the budget reflects the city's collective priorities and voices. However, because of COVID-19, instead of the traditional April 15 tax deadline, tax receipts were not finalized until July 15th. So without knowing the complete financial picture until recently, this has delayed the process significantly. Whereas the budget is typically finalized in August, this year, the review process was deferred to July and August. The budget will now be finalized in late September by the Board of Supervisors, and October 1st is the deadline for the mayor to sign the budget. So who are these key budget decision makers? We're not going to get into the weeds here, but it's important to make clear who all has a guiding hand in the city's budget process. As San Franciscans, as advocates, this is who we need to be in touch with to express concerns about how resources should be allocated. You'll note that this includes representatives from the mayor's office, various department heads, and members of the Board of Supervisors. Let's look at some key dates. So here are the adjusted dates, which include all the opportunities for public comment on the budget. The hearings in July have since passed. However, the departmental hearings in August are going to be key times for the community to show up and participate in public comment. You can see a more complete budget and appropriations calendar by visiting the link at the bottom of the page. If someone could please drop the link in the chat, that would be great. The No New SF Jail Coalition and partner organizations will be sending out reminders about when these hearings will be and provide resources for public comment. Now, I mentioned the mayor's budget instructions. So what are budget instructions? Budget instructions are the annual guidance intended to inform departmental priorities. Budget instructions are delivered every year by the mayor in December. City departments craft their budgets based on the mayor's budget instructions. Because city departments craft their budgets based on the mayor's budget instructions, it's useful for the public to know these guidelines. We can utilize this guidance to hold the mayor and the city accountable to these priorities. The city budget priorities pre-COVID-19. In December of last year, Mayor Breed directed department heads to prioritize identified funding to help people suffering on the city's streets. San Francisco has a variety of co-occurring crises, including homelessness and drug overdose, and Mayor Breed identified the need to focus on funding services so that we can get people off the streets and into the care they desperately need. We need some context for this, however. Before we discuss the mayor's updated budget instructions, first, a little context here. Going into 2020, revenue growth had been slowing and rising costs were significantly outpacing this revenue. Now, due to both state and city budget shortfalls, and because the economic recovery from COVID-19 is expected to take a significant period of time, associated adjustments have been dictated. So, given the pandemic, what are the new budget priorities? Mayor Breed has required mandatory budget reductions to help close the deficit and find ways to deliver city services at modified levels that incorporate public health guidance so that the city can operate in a safe manner. Prioritizing equitable services for vulnerable populations and underserved populations was listed as one of the top priorities. This is useful for us when it comes to public comment. With these priorities in mind, there's room for the community to craft an effective budget strategy for advocacy. This is the purpose of our collective visioning activity, which will be led by Sheba, a member of Critical Resistance and the No New SF Jail Coalition. But first, right now, we're going to take a 5-minute break to listen to some music before that begins.
Thanks, Wes. And just to clarify, if you need to get up and get some water, go on a bio break during this break, please feel free to do that. We'll just play some music for you all to enjoy in the background.
Los Angeles operates
the largest jail system on earth.
The largest jail system on earth.
Let's invest in people,
not punishment. It's time to defund the sheriff.
Hashtag defund the sheriff.
And reinvest resources into what really keeps us safe.
Education,
housing,
mental health services,
and jobs. Defund the sheriff now. International barriers. Shine a light under the president's skirt. Snake the bush, expose the dirty work. Who chose this dirty jerk? Is it the NSA, the CFR? I don't even know why we at war. To rebuild the holy lands, or to build up the wealth and pocketbooks of these controlling man's little Richards of office. Come up out the closets, the cabinets are filled up with roaches and rats. Shine your light on that. Get the flamethrower gassed up. But if the price of fuel costs you your last buck, you could thank the bureaucrats for that shit. Looking for the smoking gun, but all the documents have been redacted. Shine a light on the freedom of information. We ain't ever gonna see the true history of this nation as long as people staying distracted. We asking for it till we get up and start blasting for it. Whether it's firearms or we're using words as bombs and knowledge as weapons, we refuse to be kept in the darkness. The politicians is heartless, and corporations gonna pay them off regardless. But everybody gotta play a part in this fight. It's time for you to shine your little light. Let your light shine. Yeah. Telling you to let your light shine. Oh, you never know what you might find. Yeah, and you can't win if you fight blind. So let your light shine the same way I do mine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Shine a light on how the federals send in the goons to cut out the moon on John Lennon. And they did the same thing to Luther King, cause the dream don't fly very high. If it loses swings, push up your lighter for the DC fires and flings that burn watts up. Neighborhoods getting shot up by dirty cops that spark beef, kicking dust so high to justify their presence in the street. Shine a light on the grassroots, but now that the banks don't even have loot, it's all a crapshoot. Shine a light on the Kremlin and how they had dude on the screen all green like a gremlin. Terrorism coming so many styles now. Sophisticated agencies don't even have to hide out. It's to the point that I write raps and codes to the fact that I know what's happening and exposed, except to those who share my same frame of mind and agree with me on where the light needs to be shined. The whole system needs to redesign, and the old power holders all need to resign. Shine your lights. Yeah, telling you to let your light shine. Oh, you never know what you might find. Yeah, and you can't win if you fight blind. So let your light shine. Same way I do mine.
All right, everyone, hope you enjoyed that break. Are we ready to come back into the big group? Sheba, are you ready for the next section?
I'm ready.
Great.
Thanks. Glad to hear that music. This album just came out this week and I think it's fire. So in a few moments here, we're going to start a reflection or meditation. And then after that, we're going to give you a few minutes to write privately before we get into our breakout groups. So this is a good time to get some pen and paper or open up a notes document. And so after that, we'll enter into the breakout rooms and talk about things that we want removed from the budget and things we want included. So first off, if you're on the phone, we invite you to stay. You're not going to see the shared screen that everyone's going to be using, called Miro, but you can share your thoughts verbally, and the facilitators are going to read what's on the screen and can take notes of what you're saying. If you've signed in with both your phone and your computer, I encourage you to connect these two so that you don't end up in two different rooms. You can do this by listening to folks like you all and understanding from the residents of San Francisco or from people in other cities who have had similar situations, what their experience is like. Your experience is priceless, and it should go into all of the government's decisions. We're going to now move into Miro. So all of our helpers have put on the link to our Miro board, and I'll talk you through what it's like to use this service. This is an online whiteboarding program, and things may fail. Hopefully we've had our share of failures already today. I always like when something goes wrong because it means maybe that was it. And Miro goes smoothly, but sometimes things break. So if you have any glitches, if you have buffering issues, just stay on the line and let our facilitators know what you'd like to put onto the board if you can't actually type into it. As you go into the Miro board, you're going to see that there are different rooms here, and you want to find the board number that matches, or actually you're going to find a board that matches the facilitators you're with. You'll find that out in breakout rooms. If you try to write on the sticky notes, you're going to, that should be fine. You should be able to just click or double click on them to write in. If you have trouble, you can, or it might be that someone else is writing on that, and you might want to bring in another sticky note. There's a sidebar on the left that has an icon there for sticky notes. You can click on that and bring in another one, choosing the color that's associated with the type of note you're trying to leave. So before we go into that, I'd love for us to have a short meditation just to get into this visioning mindset. The meditation is going to be 2 minutes, so don't worry if these things get you a little nervous. It's going to be quick. Just give yourself the time to relax, to visualize. Visualizing it's a potent activity. It helps us to find inspiration, to build power, and ultimately create change. And often our minds are actually better at developing ideas after they've had a chance to pause. So just get comfortable wherever you are. Sit in a way that feels good for you, that allows you to relax. If you're not looking at the closed caption or the interpreter, you can maybe close your eyes and breathe in a deep breath. I like to breathe in for 4 counts and then out for 8. That relaxes any anxiety we feel, opens our mind. So you can do that at your own pace. In for 4 and out for 8. And one more. So imagine that you're waking up in the morning, maybe this morning, and imagine what you're expecting to see in your surroundings, the needs that you have. Imagine what might be missing there, what might be giving you this feeling of unease, this insecurity. Imagine you're walking out and seeing your neighbors and things that you see that they need, that they have or don't have. Look at businesses, at spaces. What is missing and what's present? Think about how the city is addressing those issues now. Maybe how they could be addressing them. Now let's start a new day. Let's wake up again. Imagine you live in a neighborhood that's thriving. And you wake up in the morning and you feel secure, you feel empowered. Your family has what they need, and they have even the ability to go after what they desire. The future is feeling bright, it's feeling full of possibility. Imagine you move down the street and you observe what your neighborhood and some other neighborhoods are like. You feel like there's an opportunity to live out dreams that you and your neighbors and your family has had for years. You feel like you've been invited and welcomed to have a dream. So open your eyes if they've been closed. And think about anything that came up in that reflection for you. What are issues that are present in a community now that keep your city from realizing that ideal? How they're being addressed and how they should. And write down whatever you remember sensing, what you think would help you and your family and your neighbors to shift to that light. We'll take 3 minutes to write. And I would love actually if we could even go back on the slides to the previous one right before here. And I'll show an example of how some other people have done this visioning. And understanding that there are different ways to address issues of need in our community that don't involve punishment systems. Like having people to check in with people that they see sleeping unhoused and just make sure that they have what they need, and that if they're looking to have a different place to rest, that that's available, or other things are taken care of. Now we'll come back together about 3 minutes, 1:53. It's going to take 30 more seconds. Write down anything you're thinking of. For all the internal processors, I've heard it can be really useful to take this private time to get your thoughts together. Okay, I'm going to go now to the Miro boards that you see. So you can actually stop screen share. You'll see on that board that there are different rows or colors for different types of community resources. Yellow for housing, green for community space, etc. That might be right. You'll see it on the board. If something you want to put on that board fits across multiple categories, no worries. Choose whichever one makes the most sense to you. We just want to understand what it would mean for your city to fund things in a useful way. And try to think a little bit broader than we just need housing, which we know we do. But also, what does that mean to you? How have you seen that addressed in the past in a way that's helpful or not helpful? If it was you personally, how should that service or resource be created, provided? So we go into, we're going to go into these rooms now. I don't know if you, our brilliant Steffi is putting them all together. You can start making that available. And you'll be introducing yourselves to one another in your breakout rooms.
Can you put universal basic income in there and proactive mental health? Because right now we only have.
Thanks for participating and all of the great ideas. As people are coming back into the room, I just wanted to remind everyone to turn off their videos again for the upcoming presentation to help with making sure this event is accessible, and we will encourage everyone to use their videos again in our later interactive session. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Christine. All right, I don't know about you, but it always feels like there's not enough time. It could be an hour, we might still feel that way. But hopefully you got to hear from some other people in your community, see some different ways that people are thinking about this issue, and to know that you're not alone in wanting there to be change. You might still also start getting new ideas after this. So like I said, pause is very important for idea generation. And as you keep reflecting on the session and what you heard from people and what you see on this board, other things might spark for you. So now you can feel free to snoop around and look at some of the other boards, what people talked about. It's nice that Miro has this scrolling feature. And I would love to hear from some of our facilitators. What are some interesting ideas or conversations or questions that came up in your group? We have time for probably 2 or 3 comments. And you can also feel free to tap someone in your group to share something they brought up, if you'd like.
I can say a few words about what our group came up with, if that's okay.
That'd be great. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, it sounds like some of the main things that people were really excited about, of course, were funding. Well, yeah, thinking about housing, and not just housing, but like how to create cohesive neighborhoods. So we heard things such as like long-term, like ways for people to stay in their homes, even if they're renters, that they're not going to get kicked out or priced out. Also like collective home ownership models, and also things like people just want more venues to meet their neighbors and more community spaces for unhoused neighbors to just be in and get the services they need in a loving sort of open environment. And then ideally help them to not be unhoused if they don't want to be eventually too. So those are just a few of the directions we were going in. There was a lot more. I'll stop there though and give other people a chance to share.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, this is Bobby. We had a lot of really great things in our board as well. A lot of great thoughts. One of them that I really like stood out to me was just the accountability of police and no metrics. Kevin had mentioned it. If you wanted to like give a minute, or maybe talk a little bit about what you were discussing.
Yeah, thank you. Let me turn on my video temporarily, if it will turn on. So yeah, if you can hear me, hopefully I'm on a headphones, so hopefully I'm coming through okay. And okay, great, thanks. So yeah, what I was talking about, and this was teed up by David, who had some really good insights about metrics of police versus metrics of so many other agencies and services that are vying for funds, but are tied by how much they produce or how much they contribute, and whether that is justified in getting the funding that they're asking for. And so with the police, there's certainly there doesn't seem to be any metrics that would say, you know, you're not doing your job appropriately, you're not accountable to the community in the way that you need to be. And so the lack of that just makes it all the more easy for them to continue to justify getting more funding and expanding their scope. So coming up with ways to provide good accountable metrics for the police would be important. I've also noticed that in Oakland, the metrics are actually the other way around in terms of hiring or bringing on officers from other departments or from other agencies. The metrics tend to revolve around, okay, how many felony arrests did you have? How many misdemeanor arrests did you have? How many traffic stops did you have? And so, you know, those metrics of basically forcing them to meet minimums is more harmful, and we need to come up with better ways to measure the police. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. That helps us to better be prepared for advocating for dismantling it too. We don't really know what's going on, then it just becomes this black box. Sometimes we want to also make sure that we don't send the message that there are better forms of police to have. I'm reminded of that testimony in the beginning where someone said that, you know, we're not just trying to create police that are more life affirming. We know police came from slave patrols, and we know that toward history of how they're in place in our communities. But I love that idea that we need to get data and understand what's actually happening between police and our communities. Anyone else? Maybe one or two more comments before we go into our break and our public comment practice. You know, I'm seeing some fun things on this board. And you can kind of clean it up and synthesize and get some ideas out to the group later on. about green spaces and nutritious food. Great. I know in our group, we heard from a few people about how access is important, that it's not just let's make sure these things are available, make sure that there's health. We all know there should be guaranteed health care, for sure. Everyone on this call, we're guessing, probably feels that way. And guaranteed housing. But just because these things are available does not mean that people feel welcome to use them. So digging into what does real accessibility mean? All right, so go back to screen share, and I'm just going to give a few announcements. Right now, there's a webinar coming up this week that we encourage you all to attend to if you found this interesting. It's going to be on justice reinvestments to defund the police, solutions for a better world. If we sent out slides yesterday, and so you can go there for a link to this, or maybe someone can also put that into the chat. Also, make sure you sign up for updates from us if you want to keep hearing about more events like this or other things we're doing around budget advocacy and how we're bringing your comments that you have here to life. Because that's really what we try to do. we put this together to have conversation in the community, to align on ideas, but also because we do take these ideas and bring them to legislators. We also have a feedback survey that will be in the chat. Help us make these better and better for you as we keep putting them on each month. We'll have another session next month in August. All right, look out to the chat for some of the links to those announcements. And this next session, if you can stay for it, I know you're going to enjoy. As someone who has been trained by Muhammad from CR, I think it's going to be great. We have him helping us practice and learn how to do public comment and how to use that tactic for bringing your ideas to life. So I know this will be a useful lesson in practice. Before that, Christine is going to lead us on into a 5-minute music break first. We'll see you all soon.
Lo recorro con cautela, no miro hacia atrás. Oigo los rumores, tal vez deba regresar. Lo que sé es que yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí. La gente me mira, creo que hay esperanza ya. La sangre se me sube, solo siento palpitar. Lo que sé es que yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí. Y lo que sé es que yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí. Porque las noches no puedo dormir, no sé cómo es vivir sin ti. Porque las noches no puedo dormir, no me acostumbraré a vivir sin ti. La mirada al techo tiene forma peculiar. Me imagino estrellas, creo que las puedes mirar. Lo que sé es que yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí. Y si lo pienso, yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí, yo te quiero tener aquí. Porque la noche choose to consciously breathe. Today, I take a moment to inhale. I've been holding on for a long time. Feel it to me in the chocolate, pressure. I've been a own by my own. Every day I will breathe with intention because it is by design that the system is set up to slowly take our breath away. I will take the biggest inhale and blow out against every lie that has ever been spoken against us. The biggest inhale for every chain that has been placed upon us. The biggest inhale for the man that was just lynched today. Because your last breath was the baton for my next. When the system fails us, we must create our own. Today, we heal.
We must either love each other or we must die.
Feels like the weight of 7 sorrows is hanging on my heart, and my tears are so heavy they could rip me apart. I caress the pain, try to figure it out, but I still fall apart till I pray out loud. Suffering silent is a global issue. It don't matter your age, it's a body bag to fit you, and it's tragic. Written like a classic, where everybody dies and only God's left asking, wishing on the street like gonna be a long night. Fuck the president cause he can't seem to get his mind right. And ghetto block to ghetto block, the hustle's on. People got to eat even if the work is wrong. So slowly we keep dying, our souls can't rest. Mothers bury babies with a heaving chest. So I'm stressed the fuck out from the collective strain. So much blood on our hands, wash in the rain. I belong to you and you belong to me. We can make it through what we're going through without each other. I belong to you and you belong to me. We can make it through what we're going through without each other. Streets are filled with hollow eyes, enslaving for the system.
All right, so that song goes on for a while, but we are coming up against kind of the last part of our workshop today, so I want to keep things moving along. If you enjoyed that, you can find the Defund the Sheriff album on the Justice LA website, and I think it's also on Spotify and YouTube and a bunch of other places. So I'm going to go ahead and start our screen share again. And I'll hand it over to Mohammed.
Great, thank you, Christine. Hey everyone, my name is Mohammed. I'm with Critical Resistance and the No New SF Jail Coalition. So I'm gonna, please, if I'm speaking too quickly, just feel free to nudge me in the chat or shoot me a text, tell me to slow down. So I am here to talk about giving public comment. So we've been talking about the budget, broke out and talked about what it is that we would like to see instead of the harmful systems of policing, imprisonment, and the rest of the prison industrial complex. And in order to be able to shift resources away from the things that are harming our communities and into the things that build up our communities, a way to do that is by putting pressure on decision makers, on legislatures through the budgeting process, which has been laid out by some of the earlier speakers. So legislators construct the budget, and there's always an opportunity for us to apply pressure, to speak directly to legislators, to advocate for what it is that we want and need. Those that benefit from and protect the institutions of policing and imprisonment, they use budgeting to legitimize those institutions. And those are the places where those institutions get power, or I'll say one of the places that they get power, right? Money in capitalism means power, and the prison and policing systems have a lot of it, right? So we want to chip away at the streams of money and power to be able to build up community power. So budget advocacy is one of the many ways for us to advocate and fight for abolition. And we seek to divest from policing, imprisonment, surveillance, right? And invest in community infrastructure and radical life-affirming practices and institutions. I want to also say that, you know, giving public comment is one way to do this. So whenever there's a budget hearing, there's a place for the Board of Supervisors or the City Council or, you know, the state legislature to hear comments from the public. And that's one opportunity among many for us to organize our communities to be able to speak to what we want. And Sheba mentioned this, providing public comment is one tactic, right? It's one tactic among many. And like all tactics that we use, they're part of broader strategies that we put in place. So when we're giving public comment, we understand that we're there as one part of a larger organized plan of action to win what we want. And I really emphasize this point because organizers, so whether that be with No New SF Jail Coalition, whether that be, you know, for Across the Bridge in Oakland, with Defund OPD, is organizers working on these campaigns, if they've done their jobs well, right? They've done the work to assess where decision makers are at, where they fall on the issues, and what exactly they will need to hear in order for us to push them to our side most effectively, right? And so that's where we develop talking points and make calls to decision makers, have meetings with them, organize email blasts where we flood their offices with our demands, right? So in going about public comment, I have a video here that I want to share. And this is just to provide a little bit of context. This is a public comment that was part of a campaign to end the use of police gang injunctions in Oakland. And the person giving the comment is Isaac Ontiveros, who was with Critical Resistance and part of that campaign. So gang injunctions are a policing practice. It's a tool that is used to criminalize Black and brown youth in cities across the country. And the Stop the Injunctions Coalition successfully ended the use of gang injunctions. So this is at the Oakland City Council. And if the host can play this video.
Once again, my name is Isaac Ontiveros. I am with the Stop the Injunctions Coalition. Much of what I'm going to say tonight, much of what we are going to say tonight is not new. Much of what we've heard from the OPD is not new. This may be frustrating, but as always, we continue to have options and opportunities to move forward as a city, away from failed and destructive and divisive strategies and forward strategies that work. What is interesting tonight is that whether you look at the OPD's report or if you look at the supplemental information packets compiled and provided to you by the Stop the Injunction Coalition, we should draw the same conclusions. Despite the OPD's predictably distorted and out-of-touch recommendations, their data and ours find the same thing, that civil gang injunctions are costly and ineffective, especially in addressing violence in the regional area. The violent and the fact that violent behavior is simply pushed to outlying neighborhoods. These are the things that injunctions were supposed to address initially. These are the things that we're fear-mongered about. These are the things that are not addressed in the report, and on and on. But but by its own admission, the OPD is confused. When the world looks at the OPD, they are appalled. Whether it is behavior and suppressing the Occupy Oakland, and the outrageous number of police killings in the past year. Just 2 weeks ago, this city paid out $1.7 million to the family of Jerry Amato, who was kicked to death by OPD officers. This police violence is something that has been a point of stress and antagonism within the community for over a generation. In fact, it still seems a real possibility that the OPD will be placed under federal receivership based on the same behavior. The claims of bad apples fall as flat as the OPD's report tonight. Police violence is a problem, and it is a systemic problem. These are the same police that would enforce the gang injunction. So while we may talk all we want about putting tools on the table, or using diverse strategies, or by taking mixed approaches, we don't get to do this at the expense of common sense, or in direct contradiction to what Oaklanders are asking for. An expansion of police power with this department in these times is not creative and does not create balance. Accepting this report would be to accept shoddy analysis and to embrace failed strategies, and in many ways to abandon hope. Again, we say we cannot police our way out of poverty, we cannot police our way out of crisis in the city. Gang injunctions kick other options off the table and exacerbate Oakland's underlying problems. Therefore, we'll continue to say it. We urge the committee to reject this report. We understand that this is not an action item, but we still urge and encourage the council to abandon these failed strategies. We encourage you to take civil gang injunctions off the table and abandon injunctions already inflicted on communities in North Oakland and East Oakland. We further encourage you to wholeheartedly and rigorously pursue restorative justice, intervention, and other social programs that are community-based and that are proven to work. Like previous speakers have said, we are here to work with, from within the community, with you all, but we will continue to voice our opposition. We will continue to organize our opposition to gang injunctions and all police violence. Thank you so much.
All right. So that was an example of a really well-structured public comment, both in tone and in content. And with that, I want to take us to the next slide that lays out 7 steps for verbal public comment. So the first thing that you want to do is, along with organizers, right, evaluate the context of the meeting. So if you're part of organizing a mobilization, or you're being called upon to attend a mobilization, understanding the context of where decision makers are at, where the opponents are at and what they're doing, right? Because we're not going to be going into every situation, every hearing in the same way, right? There might be hearings where we actually have the support of supervisors and will want to be making comments that are encouraging, right? That are supportive of them defunding the police if they're already on board. There might be meetings where the city council or the board of supervisors are more opposed to our demands and what we want. So in that case, it might be more strategic on our part to have comments that are more aggressive, that push them a little harder, right? So it all depends. Number 2, identify clear targets for divestment and opportunities for investment, right? So we want to be really clear and specific about the things that we don't want, where we want money moved away from, right? And that's really the importance of doing this kind of budget advocacy and research to know how money is being spent and where we want it taken out, as well as providing the alternatives, providing the resources, again, being very specific about where it is that we want money to go, right? Number 3 is drafting your statement. So as you saw with Isaac, as you saw with Corey, who is with Critical Resistance and Care Not Cops in Portland, they had statements that were drafted, right? So it is important to have a crafted statement where you know exactly what you're going to say before you go up there or call in COVID-19 times. You want to practice. So now, especially with shelter in place, a lot of hearings limit their comments to just 1 minute. That's a very, very, very short amount of time. So you want to be able to practice to make sure that you have everything that you want to say within that minute, and also to be able to clearly articulate what it is that you want to get across. Number 5, gather all the info you'll need to submit comment. So whether that be you're giving verbal comment or sending it in, know which emails you need to send it to, know what phone number or Zoom or whatever platform it is that you're dialing into beforehand. Number 6, stay ready and organized before calling in, and so be prepared. And lastly, number 7, listen to what the other speakers are saying, especially if folks are calling in that are opposed to what we want, and look over your statement for points to emphasize or even respond to what some of the oppositional points are coming up, right? And this is really important because there might be curveballs that are thrown during a meeting. There might be something that might come up that we haven't anticipated. And it's important for us to be listening to be able to respond, right? And at the bottom here, you'll see for calling into the Board of Supervisors, the bottom of this slide is who to email and where to call if you need language interpretation. I'm gonna skip, well, actually I'll do the next slide fairly. I'll do just parts of it since we won't have time to get into everything. But that I wanna focus in on just that second talking point there. So really thinking about the strategic tone given the context of the meeting. So this is the first thing that I named, because sometimes I think we feel like we need to go in, you know, we're organizing to the halls of power, to City Hall, and that we need to go in kind of guns a-blazing and with all outrage, right? And that's not always helpful, right? We want to do what it is that will get us, will get decision makers to give us what we want, right? And so the talking points that are drafted by coalitions or organizers should have the kind of language that we want to be going into any meeting with. So I'll skip over to the next slide. And here, this is a basic structure of how to give public comment. Is you want to start off introducing yourself, say your name. If you work in the city, so for San Francisco, if you work with a department and it's specifically if it's relevant to the issue being discussed, be sure to name that. If you're a resident of the city, you can also name which supervisor represents the district that you may live in, right? You want to make the issue close to you, and you want the decision makers to really hear that, right? Because they're there formally to represent their constituents. Then you go into where you stand from the beginning, right? After you introduce yourself, and what it is that you are demanding, what it is that you're asking them to do. Then you want to provide some rationale, some evidence, some good arguments for why you believe the decision makers should take the action that you're asking them to take, right? And then lastly, you repeat what it is that you're asking them to do, right? So you want to start off with that after you introduce yourself, and you also want to end with that. And then you thank the decision makers or the committee, the board, whoever it is that you're speaking to for their time. And to go over just some very basic tips on public speaking. Again, write the message out, making sure that you have it drafted, you know what you're going to say. Be confident, be assertive, be emboldened. You know, we're here speaking about issues that matter a lot to us, and we want decision makers to feel that, right? Again, being strategic with your tone and intentional with how you're saying things. Speaking from the heart, speaking clearly and articulately, and staying on message. This is really important. Okay, so with that, there's a slide here about written comments. we follow the same kind of general breakdown, except these are going to be sent in advance of a meeting. And again, making sure that you have everything that you want to say in a structured format. And this is where it's also useful to share your written comments with, you know, an organizer or someone who has done these kinds of things before, if you haven't already, to make sure that you're, you know, on the right track. And again, important to know where you're going to be emailing them before you do so. Because usually it might be like, depending on the hearing or the committee who you're speaking to, it could be, you might have to send your written comments in 24 hours in advance, more or less. All right, so we wanted to give folks a chance to do some practice. So you'll see that Melissa in the chat dropped some example talking points about the budget. There's an English version and then a Spanish version. And we're going to be breaking you all up into pairs. And what you're going to do is, if you would like, take the first, this is going to be for 15 minutes. So you're going to take the first couple of minutes just jotting down some comments. So jot down a paragraph that you're going to practice speaking to your partner. And I encourage people to use what's been drafted in those Google Docs. You can literally copy and paste and just take snippets from there. So the first person is going to spend 1 minute giving comments. So we're going to time it to, you know, make it more realistic, to give ourselves a minute deadline for the time allotted. Then we're going to pause, and then the person listening is going to give feedback. And I encourage people to also, you know, be honest about the feedback. What did the person do well, and where can the person improve, right? And this is a space for us to practice, and we want to strengthen and grow our skills. So feedback is really important to do that. And then after feedback has been given, then we're going to switch and do the same thing. All right. So with that, I'm going to let our Zoom extraordinaire, Steffi, break us out into groups or into pairs, and we'll get going.
Thanks, Mohammed. And while we are setting up the breakout rooms, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to our interpreters for the day, and we'll see you all back in the main room soon.
that could speak.
I think.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So I'm going to guess this is everyone who should be back into the main room. We originally had a share back session planned, but we are now at 3:17 and I want to respect everybody's time. So we're gonna go ahead and move into our closing. So of course, if you have any questions or feedback about that session, please do let us know. We are here for you. But to recap, we learned today about how budget advocacy is one way to fight for abolition, right? This is a strategy about financially chipping away at policing and imprisonment, as we just talked about in the Skillshare, and then reinvesting all those funds in like building these life-affirming resources that we need. We also saw how much San Francisco actually spends on criminalization in our general budget in Kevin's presentation, and also how the entire prison industrial complex actually receives a ton of non-government funding, right? And then from there, we took a look at the city's budget cycle and opportunities for actually engaging with that. And I hope all of you enjoyed the little practice we had. It's definitely challenging to fit all of these ideas into 1 minute, and we encourage you to keep practicing. And as Mohammed mentioned, connect with coalitions and organizations who can help with talking points and strategies specific to different hearings and things like that. I'm also super excited to announce that all of the wonderful ideas that you came up with during our Miro party, we are going to incorporate into an ideas quilt. So it'll be a really cool visual that includes these ideas, and we'll be sharing that out shortly. So before we let everybody go, just another quick reminder to fill out the survey that Melissa and Viju have been putting in the chat, and to stay tuned for public comment opportunities. We will be having another one of these Abolition in Action events in late August, and the date is TBD, so please stay tuned for that as well. And then our email, which is up on the screen, is nonewsfjail.outreach@gmail.com. Again, if you need some help or feedback and just have more questions in general, please do let us know. And we'll be following up with resources in the next couple of days, including a lot of the things that we covered today. So thank you all so much for attending. Huge thanks to our speakers, our facilitators, and interpreters for making today possible. All right.
Thank you.